Let us jump now to the other extremity of our mental life, and, following our line of thought, go from the psychical existence which is merely acted to that which is exclusively dreamed. In other words, let us place ourselves on the base AB of memory, where all the events of our past life are set out in their smallest details. A consciousness which, detached from action, should thus keep in view the totality of its past, would have no reason to dwell upon one part of this past rather than upon another. In one sense, all its recollections would differ from its present perception, for if we take them with the multiplicity of their detail, no two memories are ever precisely the same thing. But in another sense, any memory may be set alongside the present situation. It would be sufficient to neglect in this perception and in memory just enough detail for similarity alone to appear. Moreover, the moment that the recollection is linked with the perception, a multitude of events contiguous to the memory are thereby fastened to the perception, an indefinite multitude, which is only limited at the point at which we choose to stop it. The necessities of life are no longer there to regulate the effect of similarity, and consequently of contiguity, and as, after all, everything resembles everything else, it follows that anything can be associated with anything. In the first case, the present perception continued itself in determinate movements. Now, indeterminate movements. Now it melts into an infinity of memories, all equally possible. At AB, association would provoke an arbitrary choice, and in S, an inevitable deed. But these are only two extreme limits, at which the psychologist must place himself alternately for convenience of study, and which are never really reached in practice. There is not, in man at least, a purely sensory motor state, any more than there is in him an imaginative life without some slight activity beneath it. Our psychical life, as we have said, oscillates normally between these two extremes. On the one hand, the sensory motor state S marks out the present direction of memory, being nothing else, in fact, than its actual and acting extremity. And on the other hand, this memory itself, with the totality of our past, is continually pressing forward, so as to insert the largest possible part of itself into the present action. From this double effort result, at every moment, an infinite number of possible states of memory, states figured by the sections A prime, B prime, A double prime, B double prime of our diagram. These are, as we have said, so many repetitions of the whole of our past life, but each section is larger or smaller according to its nearness to the base or to the summit, and moreover, each of these complete representations of the past brings to the light of consciousness only that which can fit into the sensory motor state, and consequently that which resembles the present perception from the point of view of the action to be accomplished. In other words, memory, laden with the whole of the past, responds to the appeal of the present state by two simultaneous movements, one of translation, by which it moves in its entirety to meet experience, thus contracting more or less, though without dividing, with a view to action; the other of rotation upon itself, by which it turns towards the situation of the moment, presenting to it that side of itself which may prove to be the most useful. To these varying degrees of contraction correspond the various forms of association by similarity. Everything happens, then, as though our recollections were repeated an infinite number of times in these many possible reductions of our past life. They take a more common form when memory shrinks most, more personal when it widens out, and they thus enter into an unlimited number of different systematizations. A word from a foreign language, uttered in my hearing, may make me think of that language in general, or of a voice which once pronounced it in a certain way. These two associations by similarity are not due to the accidental arrival of two different representations, which chance brought by turns within the attracting influence of the actual perception. They answer to two different mental dispositions, to two distinct degrees of tension of the memory, in the latter case nearer to the pure image, in the former more disposed towards immediate response, that is to say, to action. To classify these systems, to discover the law which binds them respectively to the different tones of our mental life, to show how each of these tones is itself determined by the needs of the moment and also by the varying degree of our personal effort, would be a difficult task. The whole of this psychology is yet to do, and for the moment we do not even wish to attempt it, but every one is clearly aware of the existence of these laws and of stable relations of this kind. We know, for instance, when we read a psychological novel, that certain associations of ideas there depicted for us are true, that they may have been lived. Others offend us, or fail to give us an impression of reality, because we feel in them the effect of a connection, mechanically and artificially brought about, between different mental levels, as though the author had not taken care to maintain himself on that plane of the mental life which he had chosen. Memory has then its successive and distinct degrees of tension or of vitality. They are certainly not easy to define, but the painter of mental scenery may not with impunity confound them. Pathology, moreover, here confirms, by means, it is true, of coarser examples, a truth of which we are all instinctively aware. In the systematized amnesias of hysterical patients, for example, the recollections which appear to be abolished are really present, but they are probably all bound up with a certain determined tone of intellectual vitality in which the subject can no longer place himself. Just as there are these different planes, infinite in number, for association by similarity, so there are with association by contiguity. In the extreme plane, which represents the base of memory, there is no recollection which is not linked by contiguity with the totality of the events which precede, and also with those which follow it. Whereas at the point in space where our action is concentrated, contiguity brings back, in the form of movement, only the reaction which immediately followed a former similar perception. As a matter of fact, every association by contiguity implies a position of the mind intermediate between the two extreme limits. If, here again, we imagine a number of possible repetitions of the totality of our memories, each of these copies of our past life must be supposed to be cut up, in its own way, into definite parts, and the cutting up is not the same when we pass from one copy to another, each of them being in fact characterized by the particular kind of dominant memories, on which the other memories lean us on supporting points. The nearer we come to action, for instance, the more contiguity tends to approach to similarity, and to be thus distinguished from a mere relation of chronological succession. Thus, we cannot say of the words of a foreign language, when they call each other up in memory, whether they are associated by similarity or by contiguity. On the contrary, the more we detach ourselves from action, real or possible, the more association by contiguity tends merely to reproduce the consecutive images of our past life. It is impossible to enter here into a profound study of these different systems. It is sufficient to point out that these systems are not formed of recollections laid side by side like so many atoms. There are always some dominant memories, shining points around which the others form a vague nebulosity. These shining points are multiplied in the degree in which our memory expands. The process of localizing a recollection in the past, for instance, cannot at all consist, as has been said, in plunging into the mass of our memories as into a bag, to draw out memories closer and closer to each other, between which the memory to be localized may find its place. By what happy chance could we just hit upon on a growing number of intercalary recollections? The work of localization consists, in reality, in a growing effort of expansion, by which the memory, always present in its entirety to itself, spreads out its recollections over an ever wider surface, and so ends by distinguishing, in what was till then a confused mass, the remembrance which could not find its proper place. Here again, moreover, the pathology of memory is instructive. In retrogressive amnesia, the recollections which disappear from consciousness are probably preserved in remote planes of memory, and the patient can find them there by an exceptional effort like that which is effected in the hypnotic state. But on the lower planes these memories await, so to speak, the dominant image to which they may be fastened. A sharp shock, a violent emotion, forms the decisive event to which they cling, and if this event, by reason of its sudden character, is cut off from the rest of our history, they follow it into oblivion. We can understand, then, that the oblivion which follows a physical or moral shock should include the events which immediately preceded it, a phenomenon which is very difficult to explain in all other conceptions of memory. Let us remark in passing that if we refuse to attribute some such weighting to recent, and even to relatively distant recollections, the normal work of memory becomes unintelligible. For every event of which the recollection is now imprinted on the memory, however simple we suppose it to be, has occupied a certain time. The perceptions which filled the first period of this interval, and now form with the latter perceptions an undivided memory, were then really loose, as long as the decisive part of the event had not occurred and drawn them along. Between the disappearance of a memory along with its various preliminary details and the abolition in retrogressive amnesia of a greater or lesser number of recollections previous to a given event, there is then merely a difference of degree and not of kind.